everybody. Welcome to Matheson Library. This, by the way, is a microphone, if you hadn't realized that yet. I asked specifically if I could use it because how cool is this? I want to talk to you a little bit about Michele Cox before we bring her to the stage. Several months ago, a good friend of mine, who knows how much I love to read, asked me if I had ever heard of a writer named Michele Cox, who also happens to be one of his family members. She's a writer from Chicago. And at that point, I hadn't. So I got curious and I read a little bit about Michele and her books. And after I became familiar with what she wrote and kind of who she was, I knew immediately that I wanted to share her with our campus. And I wanted you guys to get a chance to experience her writing. Michele's work is really interesting because it has a lot of things for a lot of different kinds of readers. So it's historical fiction, but it's also got mystery and maybe a little bit of romance, those sorts of things. And I think the most important part, though, of what she does is that she creates these wonderful, captivating, inspiring characters who you care about and you want to continue to read what's happening with them. Her series, which is called the Henrietta and Inspector Howard novels, is set in 1930 Chicago. And one of the things that I've seen that readers really liked and that I really liked too was the way that she's just so vivid and accurate and interesting just with the setting itself. Kind of makes you feel like you were there. And it was a really interesting time in history as well. So that just adds to why she's such a great writer. I'm going to leave it to Michele to tell you a little bit more about herself and her books and her story, but I did want to take just a second to brag to you about some of her achievements as a writer because I don't think that she will do that. So I just want to share with you some of these awards that she's won. A Girl Like You, which is the first book in her Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, has received numerous literary accolades, and I have to read this because it's too long for me to remember. The 2017 Reader's Favorite, the Gold Historical Mystery winner, and in 2016 at the Ippy Awards, she got the Gold Mystery winner, Reader's Favorite, Gold Mystery winner, and from Forward Indies, Romance finalist, Shelf Unbound, Top 100, Notable Independent Book, USA Best Book Award, Fiction Romance finalist, and many, many others. So we are just honored to have her here, and I'm so excited that she gets to talk to you. So if you will, please help me welcome Michele to our stage.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming out on such a nice day. It's nice that you're here instead of out enjoying the sun, so I appreciate it. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how I became a writer, what sort of inspired that, and then a little bit about the series, and then turn it over for a Q&A. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I'd be happy to answer those. So, okay. So I was a very creative kid, although I don't think I really understood that or knew it, but I was always doing these little projects. But a red flag should have been when my mom went to my 7th grade conferences and the teacher said that I had done more extra credit work than the whole rest of the class put together. I liked posters. So yeah, I was always doing something. Not really so much writing, but when my parents gave me a set of Louisa May Alcott books for Christmas, that was my greatest Christmas present ever. I read them over and over and over again. And pretty soon I started writing little fan fiction before that was a thing. And I would weirdly always have Joe March time travel to the present, and that never really worked out so well because the girl in present time could never explain to her how anything worked, like a microwave or a car, so the story sort of fell short there. So I kind of gave that up, but in high school I was actually a pretty good essayist, and a lot of my teachers encouraged me to be a writer, but I didn't think that I was good enough. I didn't think that I could really create fiction. But I did consider, well, maybe I should be something like with nonfiction, like a journalist or something like that. But I was afraid. I was afraid to go down that path. And for some reason, I thought that I was also interested in the sciences, and I thought, well, okay, I'll be a doctor. Like, there was only two choices, be a writer or be a doctor. I don't know why. So I thought being a doctor somehow would be less scary than being a writer. So I was a bio major, and I really liked it. I was good at it, I thought, but I started to notice that I didn't have the passion that my other peers had. And I also happened to be taking a Victorian lit class at the time. And I realized that that's really where my passion was. And so I decided to do something risky. I switched switched majors to English lit. Notice I still didn't have enough courage to do creative writing. So I read 4 years worth of books in 2 and managed to graduate with an English lit degree. And then I went on to all of the stellar jobs that one usually gets with an English lit degree. So my first job was, I was a calligrapher in a convent. That paid really well. And then I moved up to be an editor at Amoco Oil, reading their patents for different oil blends, which wasn't exactly Jane Austen, but there you go. Then I got a job in customer service in a lithography firm, and that was probably an all-time low point for me. So started looking around for different jobs, and I finally landed this job as the admissions director in a nursing home. So I thought that this was going to be a whole new life for me, a whole new career. Well, it turns out that I was not the best at this job either. In fact, I was actually terrible, because I didn't realize that my job as the admissions director was basically to sell beds. So I was supposed to schmooze hospital discharge staff. I was an ambulance chaser, and that was very distasteful to me. I much preferred being on the floor with the residents because they had these amazing stories. So I was always there. I was never in my office, never answering the phone. And I was always talking with them or settling a roommate dispute or finding a lost sweater or something like that. And so finally the administrator called me into his office. You can guess what's coming, right? So he said, you know, this isn't working out. But instead of firing me, he moved me into social service. And that was a dream job for me, because now I really had a legitimate reason to be out on the floor with people. So it was great. My job now was to write a little paragraph about their life story that would go into the chart so that the staff would have some kind of background onto who this person was. So it's supposed to be a paragraph, but I'm writing pages and pages and pages and pages. And just remember that this was a very old nursing home. It was on the northwest side of Chicago, and it was called the Bohemian Home for the Aged and Orphans. Weren't any orphans there, thank God, at that point. But the only technology that I had, I did not have a computer, did not have a typewriter. I had a phone on my desk and a pen. So I hand wrote all of these stories, and they were great because I think it benefited everybody. I loved so I would spend like a week to 2 weeks with one person and just sit with them and hear all of these stories that I'm sure their family was really sick of hearing by this point. But here I was like a fresh person, and it was great because they told me everything, and I think it helped them because it made them feel like there was somebody there that really cared about them, somebody that wanted to hear all these stories. And the staff loved it too. They would come up to me in the hallway and they would say, "Oh, we read your latest story, it was great." I'm like, I know, wasn't it sad? So it was a perfect job, I loved it, and then it ended very quickly because my husband and I, at the time, we adopted a baby, and it happened a lot faster than we were told it would happen. It happened almost overnight. It was a weird, long story. So, as soon as we got this baby, I quit because, you know, we had waited so long for him and we had done so much work, and I really wanted to be home with him. So that was kind of, I happily quit because I, became a stay-at-home mom. And that was the end of the writing for me. But I still think that obviously that creativity doesn't go away. And it was always coming out in other ways. Like, weird things, like I would try to create like this perfect, gardening, because that's really an artist's palette. So, but it's really hard to do, and it takes years to, create this thing. Or it would be baking or decorating the house, or I would create these elaborate birthday invitations for the kids' parties. So it was always doing something. So then, fast forward 16 years, and my oldest was diagnosed with ADHD after struggling for so long and so many misdiagnoses. And so finally, he was diagnosed with ADHD. And then the second one was diagnosed with a nonverbal learning disorder, whatever. So I thought, at the time, I was doing all this volunteer work, and I was on all these committees, and I was helping so many other people all the time. And I thought, what are you doing? Your kids need you. You need to stop doing all this volunteer work. So I just quit everything cold turkey, which is really hard for me because I'm kind of a yes person. So I just said, I've got to stop doing this and, focus on these kids. Well, that was kind of an overreaction because it didn't take that long, really, to get them kind of on the path. I mean, not like anything got cured, but at least I kind of got them where they needed to be. And now I had all this time. So I thought, well, all right, you can either go get a job, you can continue doing volunteer work, or sign up for new ones, which was kind of exciting, or you can write this novel that you always wanted to write. So I wrote the novel, and it took me about a year. I didn't know what I was doing, because I really hadn't taken any creative writing classes. I actually Googled how to write a novel. I don't tell many people that. Okay, so I followed this method I found, and it was this gargantuan, giant story. I mean, I really loved it. I thought it was great. I spent a year writing it. I spent 6 months editing it, and then I spent another year trying to search for an agent to sell it. Didn't go anywhere. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to give up on this story, call it a practice, and I need to think of something that would be more appealing to an agent. I actually didn't know what I was doing back then. Right now I would have made a different decision, but at the time I thought mystery would be perfect. So I decided to write a shorter, faster mystery type book, and hopefully that would be what I would sell. But I needed a little idea, and so where did I turn for the idea? Of course, to the nursing home where I had collected all of these stories. So I picked out one story in particular of this woman who used to tell me that she had a man-stopping body and a personality to go with it. And even at the time, I thought, wow, this would make a fantastic book. So she was this amazing woman living in the 1930s. So she lived through the Depression, and she had all these bizarre jobs. Like, she was a taxi dancer, she was a 26 girl, she was an usherette in a burlesque club, she was a hair curler demonstrator at Marshall Fields, like that was a job. And she was a waitress a million times, and she also worked at the World's Fair, the 1933 World's Fair. So every day she had to dress up in a Dutch girl costume and hand out flyers for a Dutch rubber company. And she said that that was her favorite job because on her lunch break, she got to see the whole fair. So she was despite the fact that she was this bombshell, she was a very virtuous woman, and she was always losing her job during the Depression because she would always be felt up or cornered or tried to be kissed by the manager or whoever, and she would always slap them right away and she'd be out. So that took a lot of courage back then because jobs were really hard to find. But for her, because of her looks, she easily got another job, but she just had a hard time keeping them, and that's why she had all of these weird string of jobs. So I put all of those jobs, I gave them to the heroine that I created, Henrietta, based on this woman. I put all of those jobs in the book. And a lot of other details too, like there was apparently this gang of neighborhood boys in the 30s that knew she was a good girl, and so they would wait for her to get off the bus or the L or whatever it was, very late at night from these weird like burlesque jobs. And they would follow her home at a distance until she made it home safely. And I thought, wow, that is such a cool detail. I would love to put that in the book. But it was really hard to write this gang of boys, so I squished all of them into the one character of Stanley. So there's a character in the book, Stanley, who represents these boys, and he follows her around and, you know, gets her into trouble and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I wrote the series. I managed to get it published with an all-women's press called She Writes Press. They're very small. They're located in Berkeley. And that was the start of it. So it's been a great experience. I feel like just encouraging all of you that if you have that sort of passion inside you, to not be afraid to follow it, because, you know, you don't know where it's going to lead. And you don't know where all of these experiences are going to lead you either. So, yeah, that's kind of my story. So I'm wondering if any of you have any questions so far. Oh, is this the part where we toss?
Yes, so back to the microphone real quick. If you have a question or comment, I ask that you please use this, because our TV crew here who is filming can hear us ask the question and answer the questions, and you can to each other, so I don't have to run it back and forth, and you can feel free. It won't hurt it to talk. Now, don't hurl it at someone, but you could. You have a comment? Okay, you get to start.
Okay. So do these people know that you wrote a book about them?
No, this is a good question, because the question was, do these people know that I wrote a book about them? And no, because this was in like 1990 when I was collecting the stories, and they were maybe 70, 80 at that point, so they're gone now. And I took some of their details, but of course I had to invent the inspector and the mystery and the murder and all of that, but yeah.
So, but was it fun, like, to go from there with all those pages and pages and pages of notes to construct that story?
It was hard because I think the tendency sometimes is that, with any research really, is that you're so excited about the material, and so you're so excited about what you're learning that you want to throw it all in, and you really have to be judicious, because the reader doesn't want to read through all of that, and it just looks like an info dump. So yeah, it was really tricky, because there was a lot more I could have put in, but you know, I had to pick and choose. Let's see how this goes. Made it.
Okay, I have two questions. Question one, a couple of us were talking and we thought that taxi dancer had to have been a typo, because we had no idea what that meant. So what is a taxi dancer?
That's a great question. So a taxi dancer is somebody who dances with men for money. So it used to be I think it started in New York, and these dance halls used to be places where you would go to learn to dance, and they would have girls there that would teach men how to dance, because dancing back then was like, you know, a thing to do. That was the popular form of recreation. So it started out as a learning thing, and then when it migrated to Chicago, it became more of an entertainment. So guys weren't necessarily paying these women to teach them to dance, they were just paying for a dance. So these big dance halls like the Aragon in Chicago and the Mary Gardens and all of these places, they would have these employees called taxi dancers, and men would pay 10 cents a ticket to dance with a pretty girl. And this was not, so this is like a step above prostitution, right? So this was considered a very, very bad job. Usually runaways would take this job, women who had no other choice. It was not prestigious at all. So a lot of women who had this job would lie to their parents or whoever. So that was, yeah, taxi dancer.
Wow. Okay, question two. So I'm wondering, and I always wonder this with people who write things that are set in historical times, because, you know, obviously you have a big responsibility to be accurate, and it can undermine your credibility if, you know, you have something that, oh no, that actually wasn't invented until 20 years later. So I wondered how you went about like the research process for being able to convey that 1930s Chicago.
Yeah, good question. I used a couple of different sites. So one was Encyclopedia of Chicago, is a vast data bank of different things about the era, or any era. And then also the other thing I did was to go to a lot of actual neighborhoods within Chicago have their own historical society, and some are better than others. And so some of them have an amazing amount of information about and pictures about that neighborhood. Some of them have even people who were writing at that time, like journals or whatever, they'll include those. So I was able to use those. And then also just the firsthand stories of these people. I mean, I really absorbed a lot of those details. So,
Thank you.
and I should say too, in case anybody was wondering about a 26 girl, that was a game that was played exclusively in Chicago. It was played in bars, or a cigar store sometimes would have a 26 game. It's a dice game where you would roll, I think it was 13 dice, a certain number of times, and if you scored a perfect 26, you won a drink on the house. And so they had these 26 girls who were supposedly keeping score, but really their job was to push drinks, especially on guys. So the real woman that I based the story on, that was her job too. Okay.
Thank you. I'll bear toss it.
How do you schedule your work time with your writing? How do you schedule your day to accomplish so many words a day? What is your plan? What is your schedule?
That's a good question. Well, I'm pretty disciplined, which I think is kind of the key to success. So as soon as my kids get on the bus at 6:50, I start writing. So I try not to do any social media before that, because I don't want to be distracted. I do check my email to see if I won the Pulitzer, something like that. It's always no. So then I get writing, and I usually, depending on what I'm trying to achieve, I either do a word count, like I have to write so many words, like 1,000, or I just time it an hour, sometimes 2. And then the whole rest of the day, so like for another 5 or 6 hours until they come home, I'm just doing, you know, pure marketing, like writing a blog, a newsletter, other articles, setting up events, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, and then they come home, and then I turn back into a mom, and then when they go to bed, then I might do another hour or so. So it's pretty rigorous schedule. And I didn't set out I didn't understand when I was starting this that that's what it was. People say that, you know, you think you're just writing a book, and that's fine if you do. Some people just write a book and that's it. But if you're really trying to make this a career, it's really a business. And I didn't understand that when I was going into it. So I didn't make a lot of those choices. Like, you know, I just started pulling more and more and more time until I realized, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're in the middle of a business. You have all these books. And so I might have approached it a little bit differently had I known that at the beginning. So is there anybody here interested in writing? Any writers in the crowd? No? Any readers? Yay, we need more readers.
We'll get you next. Just don't throw it.
Don't throw it.
Yeah. Cannot catch. Of all of your characters, who is your favorite?
That's a good one. Well, you know, I would have to, of course, say Henrietta, although I really like Clive. My husband's like, I think you're falling in love with Clive. I'm like, am I? So, yeah, I do love Henrietta, but I really, it's hard to explain. I love Stan too, because he's such a fun, easy character to write. And there's a character that comes into the series in book 4. Her name's Melody Merriweather, and she kind of takes the place of Stan a little bit at that point. And they're such fun characters to write. The main characters, there are scenes I have to write, many, many times to get them right. But the two-dimensional characters are just fun and fast, and I love writing them because it's so easy. So, yeah. So, probably Henrietta.
Okay, I'm probably not I'm the only non-English person in here, I'm sure. But do you start with the end in mind, or do you kind of know how you want to take the ending of the book and then build the story to the ending, or do you start? I don't know kind of how the process is.
Yeah, that's a good question. When I wrote the first book, it was really supposed to just be a one-off. And then halfway through, I realized I really loved these characters a lot. And so I wanted to keep it going, and I thought, okay, I'll make this into a series. But I realized that I needed to end it with a little bit of a cliffhanger then to make people want to read the second one. So I start out with a pretty substantial outline. There's either plotters or pantsers. Plotters plot out the story ahead of time, and pantsers just write by the seat of their pants. So I'm definitely a plotter. So I have an outline, which can change. It's not like I have to stick to it. But before I end that book, I need to know how the next one starts so that I know how to end this one. So I kind of have a pretty good idea of where I'm going with the next one before I end this one. So yeah, it's a continuous chain that I think out. But I never start. Some authors say they write the ending first and then write backwards. I can't do that.
Thank you.
You may have just answered my question. I haven't read the books, but I'm Todd. I'm going to be selling the books at the end of the, so I'm there for.
Thanks.
2 questions. Does the person maintain her good girl status through the whole story in reference to her?
Yeah, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. Yeah, she does.
Okay, because I didn't know if it was like she's corrupted by where she is or not. And the other question is, are all your books a continuation of the same story?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that makes it a little bit different type of series. I mean, some series, it's just the same stock characters and they just solve a different mystery every time. These books aren't really like that. I mean, there is a mystery in each one that gets resolved, but these books are more saga, where it's the character arcs keep going and going and going. So there's always some little things that are left unresolved. It's kind of like, and this is a dumb comparison. It's not like Harry Potter, but Harry Potter books are not standalone. They're, a big long, really one big long story, and that's what these are.
I have a question. Do you plan on writing another book?
Well, book 5 comes out next April. That's called Child Lost. And I'm kind of waiting to see if I should write a book 6. I kind of left it open-ended. I did write last year, I wrote a standalone, which has nothing to do with the series. It's also set in the 30s, also based on a story from the nursing home. And I'm shopping that one for a different publisher. So.
Throughout the series, all in the 1930s, or does it progress into different years, into a
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I thought, oh, this is great, because really my affinity is more for the 40s, and I know more about the 40s, actually, than I do the 30s. But when this woman was telling me about that detail about the World's Fair, I just so wanted to include it that I set the book in the 30s, and I thought, well, that's easy. I can just, ramp up into the war. But each book only covers about 3 months of time, so we're still in the 30s.
Do you plan on doing it?
If I keep it going, I'm hoping to, get to the war. There's different chapters which talk about trouble brewing already, but I would love to plunge into that more, deeply.
Did it take you less time to write your successive books after your first one?
Good question. Well, it took about 4 months for me to write the first book, and it took me 68 days to write the second one. It took me about 2 months to write the third. It took me over a year to write the fourth, because by that time I was so in the thick of marketing and selling the other books and promoting. And books 1 through 3 are kind of like a little trilogy. And so 4, I really had to decide where these characters are going after this. And so it made it a little harder to write. But book 5, 2018, I challenged myself to write 2 books. I wanted to write book 5 of the series and the standalone. So I said, you've got 3 months to write book 5, and then you have 3 months to edit. And so I did it. So it took me 3 months. But I almost killed myself. So it was so much pressure. Don't recommend it.
Okay, I have 2 questions again. So the first one, you mentioned Louisa May Alcott. What are some other writers you've really enjoyed who have inspired you?
I love Dickens. I love Dickens a lot. And I love Anthony Trollope. I think he's one of the most underrated novelists in the English language. I've read a lot of his books. He wrote over 50 novels, but has anybody ever heard of him? No. He's a great writer. I really feel like Downton Abbey was kind of based on his novels, but he never gets that credit. So those 2, I love Jane Austen, of course, and in more contemporary, I really like Lauren Willig. She writes the Pink Carnation series, and I love Rhys Bowen. She writes the Molly Murphy series and also Her Royal Spyness series. So it was really, really a coup for me when I think it was book 3, Booklist compared it to Rhys Bowen. So that was really feather in my cap.
Okay, so in a series, I would imagine that one of the biggest challenges is ensuring, continuity, that you haven't contradicted yourself or, that you've forgotten. I just think that would be really difficult, and especially when they're years and years apart. Like I've read books before where in book 1, the sister has one name, and by book 3, she has a different name. And so I wondered how do you ensure continuity? Do you have an editor who helps you with that, or how does that work?
Good. Yes, I do have a problem because again, I started this book without thinking that it was a series. And so then I was writing so quickly, I wasn't thinking about, you should be writing all these details down. So I think it was maybe book 3, I sent this frantic email to the editor saying, oh my God, I just realized that, there was some problem. Like I described somebody as having green eyes when all the other books had blue, or used the wrong name, something like that. And I'm like, is there still time to change it? And she said, yes, but don't you have some sort of giant character chart where you're writing all this down? I don't. She's like, well, maybe you should do that. So I'm like, okay, top of the priority list when I get a minute, which I haven't done yet. So I rely on my beta readers to catch me, and they do. So far.
Oh, so people have kind of confronted you with continuity errors?
Yeah, so that's kind of their job, is once we get to a certain point, I send it out to family and friends, and they give me their feedback. Not only on the story, like what I want them to read for is, does the story make sense? Are there big holes? Is there a problem with the plot? But they do catch things like, you called things like that. Because from the time that I start a book until I'm ready to give it out to people to sample, read it, I've usually changed a lot. And sometimes I really try to go through and do a big sweep, but it's hard to catch it all. So they help me.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You said that you interviewed several of the residents in this nursing home. What have you done with the other stories?
Great question. I actually put them into my blog. So I have a blog called Novel Notes of Local Lore. And when I was starting out writing, I hired a PR company to help me because I was not on any social media, nothing. I was probably in like negative numbers. And they said, you need to do something. So they really dragged me kicking and screaming into this century, and they said, you know, you need a blog, you need a newsletter, you need to be on Twitter and Instagram. Blah, blah, blah. So everything they proposed, I'm like, oh, I'll never do that. I'm like, I'm never writing a blog. They're like, well, okay, but how are you going to reach anybody? I'm like, I don't know, church. They're like, no, you need to be out there further. So we strategized about a blog, and finally I would send over these pieces and they would say, this is a lovely essay, but it's not a blog. Then I would send another one and they're like, this is a lovely essay, but it's not a blog. So finally I came up with the idea of using all these stories. I changed their names, but otherwise they're true. And I would put one out every week, and they liked that idea. They said, yes, that will work. And it's good because it kind of is the same time period as the book, so somebody reads these blogs, they might like the books, vice versa. But my greatest blog story is that once I was in downstate Illinois, I was with my brother, and he wanted to stop at this auction. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. So we go to this auction, and he's like, get a ticket in case you want to, buy something. So I said, okay. So I'm filling out the information to get my ticket, and the person behind the desk says, are you Michele Cox, the writer? I'm like, well, yes, I am. And she said, I read your blog every week, and I love it. I'm like, oh my God, that's fantastic. So it was so neat that here's a person that enjoyed my writing but had no idea that I wrote books. She just really loved the blog. So that was a huge, huge feather in my cap. Yeah. I have a question. Oh, you mind? They can hear you that way.
I know.
It picks up really well.
Okay. Michele, when you were doing the interview of the resident of the Bohemian Home for the Aged and orphans, did you write those biographies down? I know you did to put in their chart, but do you have copies? Or are you doing this from a memory?
I have notes. I can't do it all from memory, but some of the people I took notes from.
And you have them?
Yeah. So some people have said I should collect all of these into a book, and maybe someday if I got, some free time, which doesn't seem like anytime soon.
Well, maybe, what about your blogs and naming the book Paper of Blogs, or Blogs on Paper?
That would be nice. Yeah, it's a great idea. I just haven't had, and I feel like though if I did that, I would have to get a lot of permissions and that kind of stuff, so it would be hard. But good idea.
So imagine all these stories that you had collected back when you were at the nursing home. There's not many people, or not at all. So how do you keep your blogs up, and what stories do you write now that they're?
I did this blog weekly, so for 2.5 years, I had enough stories.
So you no longer do the blog?
No. Oh, no, I do, but now I'm recycling them.
Okay. Do you ever want to try to interview a different era? Try to do a whole new series of a different era?
For the blog or for the books?
For anything.
Yeah, I would love to do I'm hoping that the series eventually gets into the 40s, because like I said, that's the era I really love the most. But I would love to do some spin-offs, because right now I've got so many character lines running that it would be easy to do, like spin off the younger sister, spin off the angry brother or whatever, but yeah. So I'm not sure, but there's a lot of possibility.
I suggested Hallmark movies.
You have a suggestion for Hallmark movies?
I'd love it, bring it on. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? I want to thank you all for being here today, and if we could please show our appreciation to Michele. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
I think your presentation hits on so many important subjects. You know, I had never thought about the business of writing and how it is a business, and you have to be savvy in that as well. This is the coordinator of our business program here.
Oh, okay.
So, I was looking over to Allison thinking, I bet you're glad you came. Wish your students had. Yeah, it is, and I'd never thought about that before. I really appreciate it. I wanted you to know that Michele's books are up here at the table. My good friend Todd will have those for sale, and she'll also be signing books today. So feel free to stop by there, and if you have not gotten a chance to sign in at the front table, please do so before you go. And thank you all so much for being here. Have a good day.
Thank you.